have to fear him.
In war, there is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we've earned, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome to the intersection of faith and politics. This is WallBuilders Live with David Barton and Rick Green. Today, we will get the conclusion of a program we've been carrying for the last 2 days with Mat Staver from Liberty Counsel. It's where he came to speak at our Pro-Family Legislators Conference in Dallas. It's an opportunity for state legislators to come in from around the nation and exchange ideas, sharpen each other's countenance, and just sort of get rejuvenated for their legislative sessions, which they're now in 2015. But this talk by Mat Staver is covering two very important topics, parental rights and rights of conscience, in helping to equip those state legislators to go back and file legislation that will protect those constitutional rights. Today we're going to pick up where we left off yesterday, and if you need to catch up, if you missed yesterday or the day before, both of those programs are on our website at wallbuilderslive.com. Let's pick up where we left off yesterday with Mat Staver of Liberty Counsel.
The individual mandate also has an abortion component. It says that if you are in an insurance plan that covers any abortion for anyone in the large pool, however large it might be, no matter your age, gender, or your religious opposition or moral objection, you have to, in addition to your monthly premium, you have to pay a separate fee that goes into a fund that's segregated, and it has only one purpose, and that's for abortion. So I was speaking to a group of people in Michigan recently. A lady came up to me. She's a teacher, part of the teachers union. They just got notified by the teachers union, which was mandatory for her to be a part of, that you have to pay $25 a month extra in addition to your premiums, and that goes into a fund that funds abortion. And she's forced to do that. Now, you might say, if I'm going out into the exchange or selecting an insurance policy, I'll just opt out of that. Well, in that particular case, she couldn't opt out. That's the only policy provided. But if you're an individual wanting to go into so-called a state exchange or some of these other exchanges, you say, well, there may be 5 policies. I'll choose number 5 because 1 through 4 cover abortion. Good luck. The Obamacare law has a secrecy clause. The secrecy clause prevents insurance companies from revealing what's covered. They did that knowing that people would opt out of abortion. The only way you can know what's covered is you sign up, you pay your fee, you're locked in for the next reporting cycle a year later, and then they'll give you the list of what's covered. Oh, by the way, yes, abortion is covered. You have to pay a fee. So think of this. Citizens and employers are being required to participate in human genocide. So a law like we have here on the screen that you'll get that was vetoed in Arizona, passed in Mississippi, ought to be in every single state around the country to recognize religious free exercise. Additionally, what we're seeing with the same-sex marriage issue is this. You know, the Supreme Court started this forest fire in June of 2013 when they issued this 5-4 decision that the Federal Defense of Marriage Act somehow violates the Constitution. And they mentioned states' rights several times, and whether they'll be serious about that remains to be seen, because this case out of the Sixth Circuit will ultimately, no doubt, go to the Supreme Court, and we'll find out if they are serious. However, even if they are serious, the damage has been done. So in October, when 5 cases came to the Supreme Court of the United States, some of which they actually injected themselves to stay the order, because the lower courts struck down the marriage laws and they would not stay the order, so they allowed them to go into effect right away. The Supreme Court injected itself to stay the order. You would think that they would at least take one of those 5 cases. Everyone was thinking they were taking one of the 5 cases. Instead, what they did was they denied review on all those 5 cases, meaning those 5 states had same-sex marriage start to run through their state. But not only their states, those were in different circuit courts of appeal, so that represented 11 to 13 states. Then the same week, they had a case from the Ninth Circuit where it involved 2 different states. Alaska and Idaho, I believe, was in that particular case. Justice Kennedy came out and he stayed the decisions after the Ninth Circuit struck down the marriage laws. The next day he says, I changed my mind. I'm going to allow the Idaho case to go into effect. The Alaska case still can't. No reason why. He changed his mind on that. And then the full Supreme Court vacated them both and said, no, we changed our mind. They're going to go into effect for both. So Alaska and Idaho now have that. Now there's about 32 states.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. In several decisions over recent years, the Supreme Court has consistently ruled that it is unconstitutional for the government to encourage religion. Did our founding fathers agree with this? Consider the words of Henry Lawrence, a signer of the Constitution and a president of Congress. Henry Lawrence declared, I had the honor of being one who framed that Constitution. In order effectually to accomplish these great ends set forth in the Constitution, it is especially the duty of those who bear rule to promote and encourage respect for God and virtue, and to discourage every degree of vice and immorality. Founding Father Henry Lawrence believed that the goals of the Constitution could not be fulfilled apart from a fear and a respect for God, and that it was therefore the duty of government to encourage this among the people.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
So even if the Supreme Court next year says to the Sixth Circuit, okay, it is a state's right to define marriage, and therefore there's no federal constitutional prohibition against a state doing so. By the time they make that decision, the majority of states already are crossing that precipice of same-sex marriage. Now, when you cross that precipice, you are in a different realm. We are entering into a realm that we've never crossed into before. If you think about this in terms of world history, in world history, no government in the world until 14 years ago ever adopted as a governmental policy same-sex unions. As liberal as Greece was with its sexual immorality, or Rome, they didn't adopt it as official policy, same-sex unions. They may have engaged in that privately, people might have lauded that, but it wasn't a governmental policy. 14 years ago, the Netherlands adopted same-sex civil unions. In the United States of America, we're only 10 years into this experiment, 2004 with Massachusetts. And now you've got 32-plus states, and before you know it, it could be across the country. So every state right now has marriage being challenged if a court hasn't ultimately made a decision on that. This particular state has a lower court that struck down the marriage laws, and now it's going to be argued before the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. My state, which I drafted the marriage amendment with my wife, and I argued it at the Florida Supreme Court to get on the ballot. One of our great representatives, Alan Hayes, and others from Florida were part of helping to get that word out, and we passed it by 62.5%. That has been struck down by two state court judges and a federal court judge. I argued between the two state court judges, and I can tell you my opinion of their legal acumen is that they were at a kindergarten level in terms of their knowledge of what the law was, and yet they have the pen, and they go in their privacy of their chambers, and they issue this decision like, this is what the Constitution says. So Florida may ultimately be next on that list. It's coming up before the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. But when you cross that precipice, you have catastrophic consequences, not only for the family and children, in terms of the impact that it has on families and children, but also particularly on religious freedom. Everywhere this comes into effect, religious freedom will be challenged. This is a zero-sum game. This is an intolerant agenda. It's agenda with a winner and a loser. There is no coexistence in this. There is no navigating around this. This is a cultural clash of unprecedented proportions. This is a worldview clash of magnitude that we've never seen before. This is not like abortion that we had in this country. We don't like it. We can speak against it. We can have laws that nibble at it, but we weren't coerced to participate until the Obamacare. This is in your face, not that you just simply be quiet. but you must participate. If you're the photographer, you must photograph and celebrate sin. If you're a baker, you must photograph and celebrate sin. If you have a bed and breakfast in Vermont, one of our clients, you now have to allow same-sex ceremonies into your own home, even though that's where you live and you have your children that are being raised there. If you're a counselor in California or New Jersey, you can counsel on everything, but you can't counsel someone that you can change sexual orientation, attractions, behavior, or identity. This is a cultural clash of unprecedented proportions. It will affect attorney licensing. It'll affect every other profession. Just like an attorney can't speak derogatorily of someone on the basis of race, it's just a matter of time before licenses are going to be put in the crosshair if you speak out on this issue. And speaking out that marriage is the union of a man and a woman is in itself considered by these others that are pushing this agenda hate speech, and therefore qualifies you as a hate organization. So this is a zero-sum game. This is a situation in which pastors and churches, Christians and people of all stripes, will not be able to simply say, I don't like this, it's not for me, what's the government have to do with all this, I'm not going to participate in it, but how does it affect me? This is a situation where everyone is going to be confronted. Churches are going to be confronted with tax exemption from the federal level. They're going to be confronted with tax exemption from the property tax exemption. Imagine those churches like a member here in Florida, the First Baptist Church Orlando, Calvary Assembly. They're big mega churches, multi-million-dollar facilities because they're right on the side of I-4 that goes through Orlando. Imagine them losing their property tax exemption. You're talking about millions of dollars a year. Or the inner city churches. Since I'm familiar with Orlando, we got the big inner city churches, the Presbyterian Church and the Baptist Church downtown. They're city blocks. Now, they lose their property tax exemption. You're talking about millions of dollars. We're going to be into a situation where you either compromise your values or your beliefs, or you stand, and there's going to be a clash. So I encourage you to pass this kind of legislation because this is the cultural clash of our time. Let me open it up for some Q&A. We have about 9 minutes left, and David Barton will come up here. And if you raise your hand, David will get to you with the microphone.
My question is, and it goes back to what you talked about first, was, is it Jessica?
Justina.
Justina. Is there a countersuit in the works there to sue that hospital?
Yeah, there is some preparation of a countersuit going on to not only hold the hospital accountable and a couple of those individuals in the hospital, but also the Department of Children and Families as well. Unfortunately, there's no way to hold the judge accountable. The judge in the system there could have resolved this within 72 hours, and it's just an incompetent system. The law says one thing, but they don't follow it.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. In the case Lee versus Wiseman, the Supreme Court ruled that for an adult to mention the word God at a public graduation constituted both psychological and religious coercion against the students. Yet consider the actions of William Samuel Johnson, a signer of the Constitution and one of America's leading educators who served as the first president of Columbia College. At his graduation exercises, William Samuel Johnson declared to the students, "You this day have received a public education, the purpose whereof hath been to qualify you better to serve your Creator and your country. Your first great duties, you are sensible, are those you owe to heaven, to your Creator and Redeemer." Founding Father William Samuel Johnson believed that a public graduation was an appropriate setting to remind students of the duties which they owed God.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
My question is in regards to, with what we heard today about the way that the judges are misinterpreting the law, and that we can, that Congress can say you aren't allowed to let or rule on this type. Is that our only way out of this, or is there another way out of it? since we're starting to cross that threshold of where they're pushing us in? And then second part of the question would be is, as far as tax-exempt status, isn't there something where churches automatically have tax-exempt status and it can't be revoked? I heard something about there's a myth in there that you keep that.
On the latter part, they would automatically have tax-exempt status. They don't have to apply for it. So from a political standpoint, the whole political opposition or intervention is really a paper tiger. However, if they say you still have to have something that's you couldn't have tax-exempt status if you were discriminating openly on the basis of race. You might automatically have it, but if you're openly a racist entity that is openly discriminating on the basis of race, Bob Jones, for example, you'll have the Bob Jones University case. You'll have that happen in other situations as well. With regards to the other, there's a couple of ways to address it. Obviously, from a jurisdictional standpoint, in terms of Congress, from a federal standpoint, it doesn't affect the states. But the only court that is required in the Constitution is the Supreme Court. Every other court is a creation of Congress. So as Congress creates them, they created bankruptcy courts for bankruptcy. They can also take them away. They can shrink the size of the judiciary. They can limit the kinds of subject matters that they take. It doesn't prevent the same subject matters from percolating through the states and eventually reaching the Supreme Court. But I think there's ways that we can push back. Ultimately, on this particular issue, I think we have to be prepared for, and I encourage you to read the Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from the Birmingham jail. That letter talked about when government ultimately passes unjust laws, and it's not just a law that we object to or it's inconvenient and we have differences of agreement on, but unjust laws that are really unjust, and to redefine the natural created order of marriage and force you and I to not just step aside and hold our objections, but to force you and I to participate and applaud it and advance it. If that's not an unjust law, I don't know what is. To ultimately resist it. And we may be coming to a point in time in history where we relive what we've seen in our own history in America.
Matt, I have a two-part question. First, the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission in Oklahoma, my husband's on that, and a couple of years ago they discussed what to do if we foresaw this coming down the pike. And so churches were encouraged to develop a policy affirming their convictions on biblical definition of marriage, and therefore we're told that if they did this, they would have some protection against if a homosexual couple came and asked to be married. So my question is, first part is that a legitimate protection? How do you see that? The second is, when the Supreme Court said they would not hear the 10th Circuit Court, the appeals, and therefore on October the 6th, Oklahoma had to accept same-sex marriage. Could our governor have said, not in my state, because 76% of the people said marriage is between one man and one woman? Could she have done that? To the last question, yes. And some people might think, well, that's kind of radical. You just have to obey what the Supreme Court or federal court says. Well, that's not what Thomas Jefferson did. In the Libel and Sedition Act of 1789, he believed it was unconstitutional. He pardoned people that were under that. He wouldn't pursue the law. It was promoted by Adams. So Abigail was upset at Thomas Jefferson. He wrote her a letter and he said, what gave you the idea that judges are the ultimate final arbiters of law? If that were the case, we would live in a tyrannous society. Abraham Lincoln did the same thing with regards to habeas corpus. He disobeyed the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Taney, who was a racist and wrote the Dred Scott decision. And he refused, and Taney wrote him another order. He refused to let these people go who he had incarcerated. And finally, his refusal ultimately resulted in a final decision by Taney that says, Lincoln's resisted me and he's won. Why? Because it goes back to 1992 Supreme Court decision, or it doesn't go back there, but it was acknowledged in 1992 by Justice O'Connor in the Planned Parenthood versus Casey case. In that case, she said, even if Roe versus Wade was wrong,
We're not going to go there and ask that question, but even if it was, we can't overturn it. Why? Because it was such a cultural shifting decision. If now in 1992 we said what we did in 73 was wrong, people are going to mistrust us. The only power that we have, she said, and she's true, is in the confidence of the people that we're doing the right thing with the Constitution and based on reason. If they lose confidence in us, we don't have the ability to make laws like the legislature or enforce the laws like the executive. We just have opinions. Think of it. When a judge issues an opinion, if you owe me money, I get a judgment against you, it's worth nothing. The court can't enforce that. Who has to enforce it? The sheriff enforces it, the executive. If the executive or the governor doesn't enforce what the judiciary does, it's just an opinion written on a piece of paper. Historically, some of our greatest presidents, Andrew Jackson did the same thing, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln. I don't think Mitt Romney needed to enforce the Massachusetts decision, that 4-3 decision. I don't think your governor or Governor Scott Walker or any other governor in any other state had to enforce it. And at the end of the day, I think that's a clash. Since this is not just a minor issue, this is cataclysmic. That's a clash we should have.
Hey, this is Tim Barton with WallBuilders. And as you've had the opportunity to listen to WallBuilders Live, you've probably heard the wealth of information about our nation, about our spiritual heritage, about the religious liberties, about all the things that makes America exceptional. And you might be thinking, as incredible as this information is, I wish there was a way that I could get one of the WallBuilders guys to come to my area and share with my group, whether it be a church, whether it be a Christian school or public school or some political event or activity. If you're interested in having a WallBuilder speaker come to your area, you can get on our website at www.wallbuilders.com, and there's a tab for scheduling. And if you'll click on that tab, you'll notice there's a list of information from speakers' bios to events that are already going on, and there's a section where you can request an event to bring this information about who we are, where we came from, our religious liberties and freedoms. Go to the WallBuilders website and bring a speaker to your area.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
First part of your question is, yes, that is a start. We have policies like that. You can go to Liberty Council's website, lc.org. It's on the screen here. We have policies, and I recently spoke to pastors about that, but I also gave this caveat, this exception. That's what you need to do. We've got policies you can put in place. But again, think of it like this. Assuming you didn't want to hire blacks, African Americans, Hispanics. You can write all your policies you want. You could say that we believe in the segregation of races and it's rooted in this particular belief. You can have that in writing. At the end of the day, is it really going to be effective when you have these non-discrimination laws? And the answer is no. It's something you ought to do, but it's not the silver bullet.
Final question.
Thank you. We do not have a Religious Freedom Restoration Act in Indiana, but we're interested in passing one. So my question is, how do we avoid the kind of media meltdown that occurred in Arizona, and how do we counter that? We're already seeing it begin with them saying, this is simply about Christians not wanting to serve a sandwich to a gay person.
Yeah.
And that's 80% people don't approve of that. How do we counter that and provide really what this is about and counter the media furor that they're going to create to resist this?
I think you have to get out in front of the media, and I think we have to make visuals. Would you require someone to photograph a KKK rally? No. Well, if they had the same objection to a same-sex ceremony, would you require them to do that? No, you shouldn't require them to do that either. I think you have to paint a picture of the New Mexico photographer. You know, bring them up there. I mean, the baker in Oregon is in tears when she talks about the fact that she can't bake anymore. Or the bed and breakfast, or the Catholic charities in Massachusetts and other places that can't do adoptions anymore. They had to stop doing adoptions in Massachusetts. Bring those real stories and real people there and show how it is negatively these are not people who say, hey, you're you act a little different, you're gay or whatever, I'm not going to serve you a steak in my restaurant. These are people who are not wanting to do that. They just don't want to participate in an event, or they don't want to place children in an environment that conflicts with their religious beliefs. Thank you very much.
Well, folks, that was Mat Staver of Liberty Counsel at the Pro-Family Legislators Conference, sharing with state reps and senators from across the country. If you tuned in today in the middle of the program, it's now available on WallBuildersLive.com, along with yesterday and the day before. That three-part series with Mat Staver is a special presentation he gave to state reps and senators at our conference just a few weeks ago, and we wanted to share it with you. We ask you to share it with your friends and family by going to our website today at WallBuildersLive.com, clicking on those links, and then sending them out through email and Facebook and getting folks to get educated on these very important issues. All of that information available at WallBuildersLive.com. Also, click on our archive section there, and you can listen to programs for the last few months. Don't miss out on those Good News Friday programs when you need a pick-me-up and find out about some of the good stuff happening in our nation. And also Foundations of Freedom Thursday, every Thursday talking about core issues from our nation's founding and how to restore those principles. So check all of that out at WallBuildersLive.com. We sure appreciate you listening today to WallBuilders Live.
We stand undivided.